This is a biographical sketch of Moroni Leonidas Lee Mecham, my grandfather, written by Leland J. Mecham, his oldest son, in 1980. Moroni Leonidas Mecham was born at Walsburg, Wasatch, Utah on May 23, 1883, the eldest son of Moses Moroni and Elmira Jane Duke Mecham. He grew up on a farm in Ashley Valley near Jensen, Utah. He was 11 years of age when his mother died on May the 3rd, 1894, leaving one married daughter and 7 unmarried children, including Sarah Ray, a 6-week-old baby. She probably died from childbirth fever or something. It was a difficult struggle for his father to care for his large family without a helpmeet, but the older girls helped to raise the younger children. Lee never talked much about his childhood. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade. When he was 16, he had a disagreement with his father over their cash contribution to rebuild the church house. The two of them had hauled lumber from a distant sawmill to build the first church, and I presume made a cash contribution. It burned down after only 2 or 3 meetings had been held in it. The community appealed to the church headquarters for help and were told it was their duty to rebuild it again on their very own. I don't know what their labor contribution was, but Moses Moroni made a cash contribution by breaking up his only team of horses, selling one for his cash needed. My father thought that was unreasonable, considering the needs of a large family for food and clothing. He quit the church more from the unbending attitude of the church hierarchy than his father's actions. He left home and took a job on a ranch near Maybelle, Colorado. The next few years were spent working on ranches in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. He came back home and took up a homestead on the Duchesne River, 28 miles northeast of the town of Duchesne. His father took land nearby. If there had been a rift between them, it was patched up. He farmed irrigated land and ran cattle on the public domain. He married Jessie Bernice Peterson in Salt Lake City, July the 1st, 1910. 2 daughters, Maxina Ellalie and Opal Almira, were born on the Duchesne. The original 2-room log house is still standing as a part of a modern home. The place was called the Woodbine Ranch, and the Woodbine School was located on the property. When as a young man he learned to play the guitar and played for dances and community get-togethers for years. In 1916, they sold out and moved to a dry farm near Lockerbie in San Juan County, taking 100 head of cattle and several wagons and teams. Several other relatives moved there also, including Robert Bernard Burt Mecham, brother-in-law Jay and Max Peterson, brothers-in-laws Jay and Max Peterson, and Bernice's parents, Mr. and Mrs. J.B. Peterson. A sister, Sarah Ray Barton, lived in Monticello, just 15 miles west. His father, Moses Moroni, also bought land in the area but did not live there. The family grew with the birth of Leland J. in 1917, Forrest Ray in 1919, and Evelyn Bernice in 1922. Evelyn was my aunt. She was 10 years older than I. The blizzard of 1918 killed nearly all of the cattle. Dad told about taking a sled and going to the Montezuma Valley in Colorado to buy feed and try to save the cattle. The farmers were afraid to sell feed they might need for their own stock, so he came back empty-handed. Wheat crops were short for the next few years, and prospects for making a living on the farm were poor. Dry farming was poor. They sold out at Lockerbie in 1923 and moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, where Lee had a job as railroad grade foreman for the Arizona Lumber and Timber Company. In the winter, he hired on a logging engine and sometimes was a night watchman. He hired on a logging engine and sometimes was a night watchman at the mill. In 1931, he started to work for the Indian Service in road conservation on the Navajo Reservation. The family then moved to San Carlos, Arizona, where he held the position of project engineer in the ECW, sort of an Indian CCC. Dad was a self-taught engineer and knew construction work. He was always able to hold a good job, to support his family. For the next 18 years, he worked in San Carlos, Yuma, Parker, Arizona. During World War II, he worked with the land development for the Japanese relocation camp near Poston, Arizona. He died suddenly of a heart attack in April 27, 1949, and was buried in Parker, Arizona. He was a family man and proud of his family and in his heritage. He and Bernice loved to travel and made as many trips as possible to visit family and friends. He especially loved to return to Utah to visit his brothers and sisters and their families. He always said he never accumulated much money, but he counted his wealth in his family and in good friends. He enjoyed his work in the IOF Lodge and met a lot of people through the lodge. He held several offices in the Grand Lodge and Grand Encampment of the state of Arizona. Those who knew him and worked with him held him in his high regard. Mostly, I think he was admired for his generosity, honesty, and sincerity. Years after his death, a friend who had worked with him for several years told us, it was an Indian that worked with him, told us that Lee Mecham was the best man he ever knew. A lot of people felt the same way. And after the funeral, Grandma got a lot of messages from people saying that he had helped them out financially at many times in their lives. When they were struggling, he'd give them $100 or $50 or something and not expect anybody in return for his loan. And he was that way. He was that kind, generous, loving, good man. And I would say, too, he was the best man I ever knew. He was the man I bonded to when I was first born. He was my first dad, really. Lee and I both attest to that. He was the father that we didn't have for the first 5 years of my life, and for some time after at different times. He was a great, great man. Thank you, Grandpa, for being you.